Today we are going to look at these Karens got mauled by deadly animals. From a wildlife corridor where danger waited behind low fencing, to a crowded beach where predators moved beneath calm water.
It was August 9th, 2016, on the icy shores of Svalbard, Norway. A small group of cruise passengers had gotten off the ship for a guided trip across the frozen landscape. The quiet of the area made it feel like no one had ever been there before. But under that stillness was hidden danger. Rebecca Johnson was 49 years old and lived in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She worked in retail management at a large department store where she oversaw staff schedules and handled customer complaints. Co-workers knew her as someone who wanted things done her way and did not like being told what to do by others. Rebecca also enjoyed traveling, and she often talked about trips that took her to unusual places that most people would never visit. She had been to remote parts of Alaska, hiked in the mountains across the western United States, and taken photography tours in places like Iceland and Greenland. This summer, she booked a cruise that stopped in Svalbard as part of a 2-week Arctic expedition. She was drawn by the promise of Arctic views and the excitement of stepping on polar ice. Her decision to join the shore trip seemed normal when the cruise ship reached Svalbard. The cruise company provided armed guides with rifles, which was required by law in polar bear territory. Norwegian regulations made it illegal for tour groups to land without proper protection, and trained guides who knew how to handle dangerous wildlife encounters. Before leaving the ship, passengers were warned many times not to walk away from the group under any circumstances. They were told to stay within sight of the guides at all times and follow all instructions immediately without question. Rebecca, however, didn't like being told what to do and had a history of ignoring rules that she thought were unnecessary. She carried a large tote bag filled with snacks, personal items, and camera equipment. She ignored advice that food should be left on the ship to avoid attracting wildlife. To her, the rules seemed like too much worry for what appeared to be an empty and safe environment. The area around them was rocky and cold. Ice and wind had worn down the land for many years. There were ridges of dark rock that came up through the white snow, and chunks of ice floated near the shore where waves had broken them apart. Birds flew above them and made noise as they looked for food. A cold wind blew as the group walked along the shore, making it hard to hear each other talk. To visitors from warmer places, the area looked empty and frozen, like a vast white desert where nothing could survive. But Svalbard is actually home to one of the largest polar bear populations in the world. The island supports about 3,000 polar bears, which often travel across the ice looking for seals and other food sources. During the summer months, when sea ice moves farther from shore, hungry bears often come closer to human settlements and landing areas. Polar bears are the biggest land meat-eaters in the world. Their sense of smell is so good that they can detect food or prey from nearly a mile away, even when wind conditions are not favorable. In summer, when sea ice moves back and their normal hunting grounds become harder to reach, they often walk closer to human areas looking for any available food. Unlike many other predators, they show little fear when approaching people, especially if food is involved. On this day, the warnings were clear and repeated multiple times. Guides told passengers not to separate from the group and not to make sudden movements or loud noises. The guides carried flare guns in addition to rifles and had communication equipment to contact the ship if needed. Several people in the group saw Rebecca walk away from the main party, even though other passengers and guides shouted for her to come back. She walked toward a patch of smooth ice near the shoreline, holding her tote bag close to her body and looking around the icy shore. She had wandered too far. Other tourists took out their cameras, thinking she was just trying to get a better photograph of the landscape. But some people with binoculars noticed movement in the distance. A large, pale figure was moving across the ice toward their location. A polar bear had detected the scent from her bag and was approaching to investigate. The bear moved quickly, covering the ground faster than most people expected. It dropped down to all four legs, with its head low in a hunting position, and it ran straight toward Rebecca. The guides started shouting warnings and getting their rifles ready, but the bear was already too close. The impact knocked her to the ground. The bear held her down with its massive weight while passengers screamed in horror. Its claws tore through her heavy coat, and the fabric ripping could be heard even over the wind. The bear's head came down, and its jaws closed around her shoulder. Blood spread quickly onto the white snow as the animal shook her with enough force to cause more screams from the watching crowd. Guides fired warning shots into the air, and the sharp cracks echoed across the ice. The bear paused for a moment, then adjusted its grip and bit down again, dragging her several feet before finally backing away when more gunshots were fired directly over its head. The entire attack lasted less than 1 minute before the bear moved to a safe distance. Rebecca collapsed onto the ice, bleeding heavily from severe shoulder injuries that had cut through major blood vessels. She lost consciousness within a few minutes and died from blood loss and shock, despite attempts by the guides to stop the bleeding. Norwegian investigators later confirmed that she had walked away from the group, despite repeated warnings from the guides. Fresh bear tracks had been visible in the area earlier that morning, which staff had pointed out as a sign of danger. The official report concluded that her decision to separate from the group directly violated established safety protocols designed to prevent fatal encounters in polar bear territory. It was September 3rd, 2017 at a safari park outside Paris, France. The late summer sun made long shadows across the grassy areas, and cars moved slowly along the road they were supposed to follow. The park was designed to make visitors feel like they were in the wild, with predators walking around in wide spaces. The animals were separated from people only by fences and strict rules. Families came from across Europe to see lions, tigers, and other animals in settings that looked more natural than traditional zoos. That afternoon, the rules would be tested with deadly results. Rose Dubois was 43 years old and lived in Lyon. She worked as an insurance clerk at a mid-sized company, where she processed claims and took customer phone calls. Her coworker said she did not like doing the same tasks every day and would get restless when work became routine. Friends knew her as someone who enjoyed trying new things and often looked for different activities on weekends to make her life more interesting. On this trip, she wanted to see something that wasn't part of her normal life in the city. She thought the safari park would let her get close to the animals. Staying inside a car felt limiting to her, and she said it made the experience feel too far away. The warning signs and the things staff members told visitors seemed like too much to her. She thought they were meant for people who might do dangerous things. She believed that if she was careful, getting out of the car for a short time would give her a better view without putting herself at risk. The park was large, covering several hundred acres with big enclosures that went across rolling fields. Tall grass moved in the breeze, broken up by groups of trees and shaded areas where animals rested during the hottest part of the day. The road went through the reserve, winding past enclosures for plant-eating animals like zebras and antelopes before reaching the predator section. Here, visitors drove through metal gates into restricted areas where signs were posted every few hundred feet. Tigers walked around behind fences that looked far away, but everyone knew the animals could close the gap in seconds if they had the chance. From inside the vehicle, the experience felt safe and controlled. Tigers are powerful runners and can cover ground quickly in short bursts. reaching speeds of up to 35 miles per hour. Unlike lions, which often hunt in groups, tigers work alone and prefer surprise attacks. They like to strike from hiding when prey is close enough and unaware of danger. At safari parks around the world, staff stress that visitors should never leave their vehicles, because even a brief mistake can cause an attack. That day, staff reminded visitors many times to stay inside their cars. Guides at the entrance gate gave clear warnings before cars entered the tiger section. Additional staff members were stationed at points along the route to watch for problems. Despite these reminders, Rose was restless as their car moved through the area. Witnesses later said she grew impatient and complained that her phone couldn't get a clear enough view from inside the vehicle. The windows were tinted, and she said the glass was making her photos look unclear. As their vehicle slowed near a group of trees where several tigers were resting, she opened the door and stepped out with her phone raised, determined to get the shot she wanted. Other visitors saw her almost right away. Some honked their horns, others shouted through open windows, trying to warn her to get back inside. Park staff who were monitoring the area began moving toward her location, but they were too far away to reach her quickly. The grass near the tree line moved before she could react. A tiger had been lying in the shade, almost invisible against the dry grass and fallen leaves. In seconds, it jumped forward. Witnesses described the blur of orange and black moving across the ground, covering the distance with frightening speed. Rose turned as the animal hit her, knocking her onto the dirt road. The tiger closed its jaws around her shoulder as she screamed, dragging her across the ground. Dust rose in clouds as its claws dug into her body. People inside nearby cars shouted, and some reached for their own cameras, recording parts of the attack as it happened. Her phone fell from her hand, sliding across the dirt before stopping near the vehicle she had just left. The tiger pulled her toward the grass, stopping only to adjust its grip. Rose struggled as the tiger dragged her, but the deep bite to her shoulder had already cut major blood vessels. She was losing strength very fast, her movement slowing as blood poured onto the dirt road. She stopped moving less than a minute after the first strike. When staff forced the animal back with vehicles and warning shots, Rose was motionless on the ground. She died within minutes from blood loss and injuries to her upper body. The safari road fell quiet, except for distant engines and the sound of people talking about the incident inside their cars. It was September 14, 2018, at a roadside wildlife collection outside Pueblo, Colorado. Rain had been falling through the afternoon, leaving puddles along the gravel paths and wet streaks down the old painted signs that advertised up-close encounters with exotic animals. The storm had passed by evening, but dark clouds still hung over the eastern plains. From the highway, the place looked quiet, but behind the gates, cages of predators lined the walkways. The facility had operated for more than 5 years, drawing visitors who wanted to see big cats without traveling to major zoos. For years, neighbors had questioned whether the facility was safe, complaining about the rusted fencing, the unpleasant smell that lingered after storms, and the sounds of animals at night. Local residents had called county offices multiple times about strange noises and concerns about escaped animals. That Sunday, those concerns would prove justified. Angela Davis was 55 years old and lived in Denver. She had retired early after years of working in property management, where she had overseen apartment buildings across the city. Co-workers remembered her as someone who spoke her mind and did not avoid difficult conversations with problem tenants. That weekend, she was driving south to visit family members in Trinidad for a birthday celebration. The drive usually took about 3 hours, and she had left Denver in the early afternoon. On the way, she noticed the roadside collection and decided to stop. She hadn't planned the visit but told herself it would be a quick detour before getting back on the road. Friends later said she often made sudden choices like that, drawn to anything that looked unusual or different from her normal routine. The facility was small and weathered, covering about 3 acres of mostly flat land. Chain link cages stood on bare, muddy ground, with some parts reinforced by extra metal bars and others bent or rusted from years of weather exposure. The recent rain had made the path slick, and water collected in low spots near the enclosures. A few other visitors walked slowly between the cages, most of them families with children who pointed at the animals and took pictures. Inside one of the larger cages, 2 leopards paced restlessly, moving back and forth along the fence line, occasionally stopping to look at the people gathered outside. Visitors stood along the outer rail, pointing quietly while staff members reminded everyone to keep back from the barriers. Leopards are solitary animals, unpredictable in their behavior and capable of leaping more than 20 feet in a single bound. Their bite force can exceed 300 pounds per square inch, strong enough to break the neck bones of large prey animals. Even in captivity, their hunting instincts remain sharp, and they can react quickly to movement or sounds that trigger their predatory responses. The facility employed only 3 staff members that day, fewer than the recommended number for safe operation. Warning signs were posted at regular intervals, but many were faded or damaged by the weather. The barriers consisted of a single chain link fence with a waist-high rail placed about 3 feet from the cage. This design allowed visitors to get close enough for photos, but provided limited protection if someone reached through the fencing. That afternoon, staff repeated the rules to each group of visitors. Do not lean over the rail, do not touch the fences, and do not reach through the chain link under any circumstances. The warnings were printed on laminated signs and spoken aloud by workers who moved between the enclosures. But Angela, curious and unbothered by the warnings, stepped closer to the leopard cage than the other visitors. She wanted to get a better look at the animals. Witnesses said she leaned against the wet rail and reached her hand through the fence as one of the leopards came near. The animal reacted instantly to her movement, lunging forward and seizing her arms with its jaws. In an instant, the animal lunged forward with the speed and power that made leopards successful hunters. Its jaws locked around her arm just above the wrist and yanked her hard against the cage. The force of the pull slammed her body against the chain-link fence. Screams cut across the path as other visitors realized what was happening. The leopard shook its head violently, a motion that predators use to break the necks of prey animals. Blood began streaming down the metal bars of the cage. Staff members ran toward the enclosure and managed to drive the leopard back with long poles after several strikes against the fence. The animal released its grip and moved to the back of the cage, but the damage was already done. Angela collapsed immediately, her arm torn beyond repair. Witnesses described her body shaking briefly before she went still, blood pooling fast across the wet gravel. The staff tried to help by pressing on the wound with their jackets, but the bleeding was too severe. The injuries had cut through major arteries and veins, causing blood loss that could not be stopped without immediate surgery. She lost consciousness within 3 minutes of the attack due to massive blood loss. Severe arterial damage to her forearm and shoulder caused her heart to stop. Colorado officials launched an immediate review of the facility. Inspectors cited the collection for inadequate barriers and failure to maintain proper visitor distance. The enclosure remained closed, and new regulations were drafted requiring reinforced fencing and wider setback zones for predators.
It was May 14, 2016, and the Oklahoma Panhandle stretched flat beneath an overcast afternoon sky, the landscape broken only by fencing, gravel paths, and a few worn buildings along the roadside. A designated wildlife corridor cut through the area, marked by low boundary fencing intended to keep vehicles out rather than people in. Faded warning signs hung along the posts, easy to overlook in a place that did not appear dangerous at first glance. Carla Blythe was 26, a part-time childcare worker who supplemented her income with cash babysitting and treated road trips as opportunities to pad her social media feed. She had already argued twice that day, once with a gas station clerk over posted parking rules, and again with a pair of tourists who warned her that the area ahead was restricted. She waved them off, laughed, and told her sister that people got dramatic over nothing. When the car passed a stretch of open land just off the highway, Carla insisted they pull over. The fence was low, the ground flat, and to her, that meant harmless. Her sister hesitated, pointing out faded warning signs near the turnout. Carla barely glanced at them. She shared that signs like that were meant for people who didn't know how to handle themselves. She stepped out first, phone already in hand, visibly irritated that anyone was slowing her down. The children lingered near the car as Carla moved ahead, brushing dust off her jeans and scanning the area as though the question had already been settled. The landscape was stripped and exposed. Sun-bleached dirt, loose gravel crunching underfoot, sagging wire fencing, and warped wooden posts left from old signage. Wind moved unevenly through the scrub. There was no shade, no cover, and no reason to linger unless someone was intent on proving a point. A man passing on foot mentioned recent wildlife sightings and warned her not to cross the fence. Carla didn't stop. She replied without turning around, saying she would be quick and that everyone needed to relax. When birds suddenly lifted from the brush, she smirked and said it was probably rabbits. The abrupt quiet that followed went unnoticed. What she failed to see was movement just beyond the path. A fully grown male mountain lion, likely a transient dispersing animal, was using the scrub for concealment. Adult males can exceed 140 pounds and are capable of covering 15 to 18 feet in a single bound. Mountain lions rely on ambush and explosive force, typically targeting the head or upper neck to rapidly incapacitate prey. Carla stepped over the boundary fence, remarking that it was barely a fence at all. She crouched slightly, turning her back to frame the shot. Someone shouted at her to move. She raised one hand in dismissal, eyes fixed on her screen. A sudden hush fell. The only sound was dust crunching under her feet. The mountain lion closed the 10-foot gap in under a second. The impact drove Carla forward as the animal's jaws clamped onto the base of her skull and upper cervical region. The bite caused immediate catastrophic injury, fracturing the upper cervical vertebrae and crushing the neck, compressing major arteries and causing near-instant incapacitation. Her phone fell as her body jerked once, a reflexive flail before she collapsed. Witnesses later described a brief choked sound, too brief to register as a scream, before her body went still. The lion released almost immediately once Carla collapsed, backing away as shouting and movement erupted from the crowd. Blood pooled beneath her head as the animal retreated into the scrub, startled by the sudden noise and rocks being thrown. Several adults shouted and threw rocks from a distance, but no one could approach safely. Carla's sister collapsed near the fence, screaming her name. A few bystanders had raised phones before realizing what was happening. Their footage captured only sudden movement, panicked screams, and people retreating. The attack itself lasted less than 10 seconds. Emergency services were called immediately. Deputies arrived approximately 12 minutes later, followed by wildlife officers. Carla was unresponsive, with massive craniocervical trauma and extensive hemorrhage. Paramedics confirmed death at the scene. The coroner later documented fatal high cervical spinal cord transection, fractures at the skull base, and severe soft tissue injury consistent with a large wild predator attack. Death would have occurred almost instantly due to neurological disruption and neurogenic shock. The area was closed that day. Wildlife officials increased patrols and installed new signage warning of active predator movement through the corridor. The mountain lion was tracked briefly but not located. No effort was made to capture or destroy the animal. Several bystanders had captured the moments on their phones, but the footage was not released. In the weeks that followed, the children who witnessed the attack exhibited prolonged mutism and acute stress reactions. It was September 22, 2014, and a narrow canyon trail cut through the dry hills outside a quiet California hillside community, winding between scrub brush and sun-bleached rock. The path was familiar to local residents, used nightly by walkers and dog owners as daylight faded. As the sun sank and shadows stretched across the trail, the canyon grew still, its rocky folds and low brush concealing a predator that blended easily into the landscape. Jennifer Denton was 61 and well known on the canyon loop. Neighbors said she walked it nearly every evening at the same time, leash in hand, pace unchanged regardless of weather or season. A retired employee from a regional insurance office, she was remembered by former co-workers as someone who corrected others publicly and pushed back aggressively when policies changed. She lived alone in a small stucco house backing onto open space and rarely altered her routines. In the months leading up to the incident, wildlife warnings had increased. Flyers alerting residents to mountain lion activity were taped to the trailhead kiosk and replaced multiple times after being torn down. Community forum posts documented sightings near the drainage corridor. Several neighbors later told investigators they had mentioned the warnings directly to Jennifer. She reportedly dismissed them, saying she had walked the canyon for decades and had never seen anything larger than a coyote. She carried no deterrence and continued walking at dusk. On the evening of the incident, she left just before 6:40 p.m., expecting to complete her usual loop. 2 large warning signs had been installed at the trail entrance earlier that week. Multiple hikers said Jennifer passed them without slowing. A small group stood nearby, debating whether to turn back. One hiker warned her that a lion had been seen deeper in the canyon and suggested she reconsider going in alone. According to witnesses, Jennifer stopped only long enough to argue. She said the signs were excessive and accused others of panicking over rumors. When another hiker pointed out the time and the narrowing trail ahead, she cut him off and continued forward, tugging her dog along behind her. Beyond the entrance, the canyon constricted quickly. Steep dirt walls rose on both sides, boulders lined the trail edges, and dense brush pressed in close. Dry grass shifted in the breeze, and visibility dropped sharply along blind curves where vegetation blocked sightlines to less than 20 feet. Mountain lions in Southern California typically weigh between 110 and 160 pounds, and can sprint up to 40 miles per hour in short bursts. They hunt by ambush, relying on concealment and sudden acceleration, most often attacking from behind. Their killing bite is usually directed at the nape or lateral neck, targeting the cervical spine, carotid arteries, and upper airway. Dusk is a high-risk period, especially in narrow corridors that funnel both prey and predators. Farther into the canyon, Jennifer encountered a jogger heading out. He later told authorities the trail had gone unnaturally quiet, and that he'd turned back because of recent wildlife reports. He warned Jennifer and suggested she leave with him. According to his statement, she responded sharply that she walked the trail every day and continued past without slowing. The jogger hesitated and left the area, later describing the exchange as deeply unsettling. Roughly 10 minutes later, hikers on a ridge above the canyon heard a single sharp scream, abruptly cut off, followed by frantic barking. Jennifer was attacked from behind. A mountain lion burst from dense brush lining the trail, closing the distance without warning. Its body struck her low and hard, knocking her forward as its jaws clamped onto her neck, just below the skull. The impact drove her face first into the dirt, snapping the leash taut. There were no signs she saw the animal before contact. The lion maintained its bite and drove its weight down onto her upper back, pinning her chest to the ground. It adjusted its grip, compressing the neck and upper airway, while its forelimbs anchored her shoulders. The dog's leash slipped free as the lion dragged her several feet into thicker brush, shoes carving shallow grooves through the dust. Witnesses later described hearing a brief, choking sound, likely involuntary respiratory effort caused by airway compression and blood aspiration, before all movement stopped. Loss of consciousness would have occurred rapidly due to combined carotid artery compression, cervical spine disruption, and airway obstruction. The lion remained briefly, maintaining pressure until resistance ceased, then disengaged and moved uphill. The dog fled down trail, barking frantically as it ran toward the parking area. When hikers approached minutes later, the animal was gone. Jennifer's body lay partially concealed by brush. Examination revealed severe neck trauma, including deep puncture wounds, crushed soft tissue, and injuries to the cervical spine consistent with a large predator bite. Abrasions to her hands, knees, and face were consistent with the initial forward impact. There was little evidence of sustained defensive activity. At 6:58 p.m., a neighbor called 911 after the dog appeared at her front door, dragging the leash and barking continuously. Deputies and paramedics arrived at the trailhead within 14 minutes and reached the scene shortly after, moving cautiously through the corridor. Jennifer was pronounced dead on arrival. The coroner listed the cause of death as asphyxia due to neck compression with associated cervical spine trauma caused by a mountain lion attack. Estimated time from initial contact to death was well under 90 seconds. Toxicology was negative. Wildlife officers tracked the lion later that night and killed it less than a mile away. It was a fully grown male in poor body condition, consistent with nutritional stress and territorial pressure. It was July 3, 2017, on a bend of the Mary River floodplain in Australia's Northern Territory, where wide stretches of slow-moving water cut through flat, open land beneath a pale morning sky. The area appeared calm and unremarkable, the kind of place people passed without a second glance. But the muddy banks and quiet channels supported some of the most dangerous animals in the region. Faded warning signs lined the access track, easy to ignore, marking a stretch of water that was never truly empty. Maris White was 29, a budget traveler from Western Canada who moved from hostel to hostel on seasonal cleaning and cafe jobs, tracking every dollar and arguing over every expense. She had a habit of pushing back whenever someone told her not to do something, especially if it came with a warning sign or safety briefing. During her first week in Australia, she'd already clashed with a hostel manager over river access rules and mocked a tour guide for overselling danger to avoid liability. To Maris, Australia wasn't about caution or structure. It was about proving that most restrictions were exaggerated. Her travel channel was small, but she filmed constantly, narrating clips about how calm behavior and observation mattered more than fear. She hadn't started the trip alone. Weeks of shared rides and campsites had ended in arguments. When warning signs appeared, Maris pulled statistics from her phone and talked over concerns, insisting the risk was being overstated. When the group chose a safer swimming area, she refused to adjust. They separated the next morning, and Maris continued alone. At the riverbank, she ignored another warning marker, half-submerged, sun-faded, barely legible, and commented into her camera that Australia ruined every good spot with fear. She scanned the water slowly, narrating what she saw: a flat, dark surface, drifting leaves, no splashing, nothing obvious. She pointed out the stillness, the quiet, saying this was what real danger didn't look like. Standing and watching felt sufficient to her. Waiting longer felt unnecessary. She slid down the muddy bank, boots sinking slightly, stopping less than 10 feet from the water. The mud near the edge was smooth and damp, shaped by repeated movement. She crouched, angling her phone to frame both her face and the river behind her. Saltwater crocodiles are apex predators that can remain motionless for hours, submerged with only their eyes and nostrils above water. Adults can exceed 20 feet in length and weigh over a ton. Their bite force measures over 3,700 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a small car. They strike with explosive speed, launching their massive bodies from the water to seize prey before dragging it beneath the surface in a death roll that disorients and drowns victims. The river erupted. The surface surged violently as a massive force struck from below. The crocodile's jaws clamped around her lower right leg, just above the ankle, crushing bone on contact. The sudden pull yanked her forward and down, slamming her chest into the mud and knocking the air from her lungs. Her scream broke into a single, sharp gasp as the animal reversed into deeper water. Her phone flew from her hand and landed face up on the bank, still recording. She clawed at the mud with both hands, fingers digging into the saturated soil, but the pull was constant and overpowering. As the crocodile reached deeper water, it rolled once, twisting her body violently. The force dislocated the knee and tore muscle and skin as the limb was dragged sideways. Blood spread rapidly across the surface as she was pulled under. Her arms surfaced briefly, hands grasping and slipping, before disappearing beneath the opaque water. The turbulence lasted only seconds. Then the river stilled, ripples widening until the surface looked unchanged. In that brief moment, survival was impossible. The remote riverside location meant she wasn't noticed missing until nightfall, when she failed to return to the roadside campsite and her gear remained untouched. Rangers were alerted the following morning. Investigators found clear drag marks leading into deeper water and fragments of clothing caught in reeds downstream. A controlled search over 3 days recovered partial remains, soft tissue and bone fragments, more than 3/4 of a mile away. The coroner listed the cause of death as hemorrhagic shock and drowning due to catastrophic traumatic injury sustained during a saltwater crocodile attack. Findings included severe crush injury to the lower limb, massive vascular damage, extensive soft tissue loss, and injuries consistent with forced submersion and death roll behavior. Survival was deemed impossible given the speed of the attack and the extent of trauma. Maris's camera had been filming at the riverbank, but the material was never released. It was August 9, 2015, on a narrow backcountry trail in Yellowstone National Park, where the ground rose and fell through dense pine forest, and the air smelled of dust, sap, and sun-warmed needles. The trail crossed land shaped by fire, snow, and long winters, a place where large animals moved freely and did not always avoid people. Small warning signs stood at the trailhead, easy to overlook, reminding hikers they were entering active wildlife territory. Maren Keel was 42, a regional insurance adjuster from Idaho Falls, who spent most of her year cataloging damage left behind by floods, collisions, and storms. Risk was something she believed she understood better than most. Hiking was how she tested that belief. Yellowstone was meant to be another controlled challenge. Marked trails, known dangers, manageable variables. She told people she wasn't reckless, just informed. At the trailhead, she had already clashed with a volunteer ranger who suggested waiting for a group due to recent bear activity. Maren cut him off, tapped the canister of bear spray at her hip, and demanded to know why the trail remained open if it was truly unsafe. When another hiker mentioned a sow with cubs seen earlier that morning, she scoffed and said, "People mistook tracks for sightings all the time." She started up the trail alone before anyone could respond. She entered a shallow drainage thick with willow and shadow as the forest abruptly went quiet. The wind dropped off. Birds lifted from the brush all at once. The stillness settled in fast and heavy, the kind that made other hikers hesitate or turn around. Maren didn't. She pushed uphill, audibly irritated by how often people behind her stopped to debate smells, tracks, and warnings. Friends later described her as methodical but inflexible, someone who didn't adjust once she'd decided she was right. She chose the trail because it was rated moderate and officially open. Bear spray bounced at her hip, still unused. She believed preparation justified pressing forward, even when multiple strangers advised otherwise. As the trail climbed, the soil grew damp and visibility shrank. Willows and young pines closed in until sightlines dropped to 15 or 20 feet. Blind corners stacked one after another, terrain where anything just off the trail would remain concealed until contact distance. Fresh claw marks scored a fallen log. Several branches lay snapped at chest height. Maren passed two hikers moving downhill quickly, faces tight, packs cinched high. They warned her again, a sow with cubs less than an hour ahead. She fired back that unless they'd actually seen the bear, they were speculating. Without slowing, she told them she'd manage and continued uphill. Grizzly bears in Yellowstone commonly weigh between 400 and 700 pounds and can sprint over 30 miles per hour in short bursts. Defensive encounters occur at extremely close range. When cubs are involved, attacks are rapid, forceful, and focused on incapacitating the perceived threat, rather than feeding. Maren stepped over fresh scat deposited directly on the trail. Still moist, the odor strong and unmistakable. The brush narrowed further. Her footsteps echoed once, then vanished into the vegetation. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Birds fell silent as Maren stepped past the fallen log. What followed unfolded in seconds. The willows to her left erupted. The sow covered the distance almost instantly. Maren never had time to deploy the spray. The impact drove her backward onto the ground with crushing force. At close range, the bear slammed into Maren's upper body. Its jaws clamped across the left side of her face and scalp. The bite fractured the zygomatic arch and maxilla, tearing soft tissue and driving her head hard into the ground. Loss of consciousness was immediate. Blood pooled rapidly into the soil beneath her. The sow released and bit again across the shoulder girdle and upper neck, compressing the cervical spine as she shifted her weight forward. Claws raked across Maren's torso as the bear dragged her several feet into the brush and pinned her beneath her chest and forelimbs. A defensive posture commonly documented in sow with cubs maulings to prevent a threat from rising. Hikers downslope screamed and fled. One fell. Another dropped a pack and froze before being pulled away. The bear delivered several rapid bites and powerful swats, forces capable of causing flail chest, pulmonary contusions, and extensive internal hemorrhage without prolonged contact. The mauling lasted less than a minute. Once Maren stopped moving, the sow disengaged and moved uphill. The cubs were glimpsed briefly before all three vanished into dense cover. After several minutes, shaken hikers regrouped. One used a satellite phone to contact emergency services at 10:41 a.m., relaying GPS coordinates to park dispatch. Rangers arrived approximately 45 minutes later, advancing cautiously with rifles raised. Maren was pronounced dead at the scene. The county coroner documented catastrophic craniofacial trauma, multiple facial fractures, deep puncture wounds, cervical spine injury, bilateral rib fractures, and extensive internal hemorrhage consistent with a short-duration, close-range defensive grizzly mauling. Death was attributed to traumatic brain injury and cervical spine disruption occurring within moments of first contact. The trail was closed for the remainder of the season. Additional warning notices were posted at all access points. Rangers monitored the sow for several days, but did not euthanize her, classifying the incident as a sudden defensive response in dense cover near cubs. In the weeks that followed, Maren's family retrieved her belongings from the ranger station. Hikers left handwritten notes at the trailhead, unofficial warnings describing how quickly it happened, how little margin there was, and how ignoring advice offered no protection once the brush moved. It was January 18th, 2013, and the beach south of Cape Town was already loud with voices, crashing waves, and the steady flow of people moving along the shoreline. The wide stretch of sand looked ordinary and welcoming, the kind of place where families settled in without much concern. Just offshore, the water darkened quickly, its cold blue surface hiding predators that had hunted these currents for thousands of years. Weathered warning signs stood near the access paths, faded by sun and salt, easy to miss as swimmers filtered past them and into the sea. Lauren Jacobs was 37, who stood waist-deep near the warning buoys arguing with a beach patrol volunteer, while her family waited farther up the sand. She pointed repeatedly toward the water, citing other swimmers she claimed had gone in earlier, demanding to know why the boundary was suddenly being enforced. When the patrol member reiterated the warning and told her not to go farther, Lauren turned away mid-sentence and continued forward anyway. From shore, nothing about her movements looked immediately unusual. She waded steadily, water climbing from mid-thigh toward her hips. Several minutes later, beachgoers saw her pause, then jerk violently as the surface around her erupted. At first, the disturbance looked like a breaking wave. Then the water darkened, spreading outward in irregular pulses, and people began shouting when they realized it was blood. Lauren was a regional sales coordinator from Nevada, accustomed to winning disagreements through persistence. Years of travel had made her comfortable dismissing local advice, particularly when it conflicted with her own judgment. She spoke openly that morning about swimming regularly and being more capable than most, repeating it whenever anyone suggested staying closer to shore. This was her first extended vacation in years, and she was determined not to spend it behind ropes and warnings. By mid-morning, she had already complained loudly about patrols and red flags, calling them excessive and inconsistent. When her sister urged her to stay shallow, Lauren snapped that fear wasn't going to dictate her holiday. She handed her phone to her children and told them to keep filming, saying she'd only go far enough for the waves to break properly before turning back. The water was slate gray, cold, and opaque, with a long, shallow gradient that obscured visibility beneath the surface. Great white sharks patrol these nearshore zones using vision, vibration sensing, and electroreception, detecting muscle movement and contrast. Adults commonly measure 13 to 16 feet and can weigh over 2,000 pounds. Their attacks are typically fast, upward strikes from depth, often targeting the thigh or lower torso. Red flags lined the beach, and warning buoys bobbed offshore following a reported shark sighting earlier that morning. Lifeguards blew whistles as Lauren moved past the final buoy. She glanced back once, waved dismissively, and continued forward. As she paused between wave sets, seabirds lifted abruptly farther offshore. The surface around her flattened momentarily. Witnesses later said they saw a broad shadow rise beneath her before the water surged upward with violent force. The shark struck from below and slightly behind, driving into Lauren's upper thigh with tremendous impact. Its jaws closed briefly, tearing through muscle and severing the femoral artery and vein before releasing. The force twisted her body sideways and partially submerged her. She surfaced once, arms moving in a short, reflexive motion. Blood surged into the waves, quickly dispersing. Within seconds, her movement slowed as catastrophic blood loss caused a sudden drop in blood pressure and cerebral perfusion. She lost consciousness and went limp, her body drifting face down. Screams spread along the beach. Some people ran, others stood frozen, pointing offshore. Lifeguards hesitated briefly, scanning the water for additional shark presence before entering. Rescue boards were deployed cautiously. When guards reached Lauren, the injury to her upper leg was immediately apparent, with extensive soft tissue destruction and uncontrolled hemorrhage. She had no palpable pulse and was apneic. Emergency services arrived shortly after and pronounced her dead at the scene. A preliminary coroner assessment later attributed death to exsanguination, secondary to traumatic femoral vascular injury, consistent with a large great white shark bite. Loss of consciousness was estimated to have occurred within seconds to tens of seconds following the strike. No defensive wounds were present, indicating sudden incapacitation. The beach was evacuated and closed temporarily. Shark patrols were intensified, and aerial and acoustic monitoring increased. Lauren's family returned home early and declined interviews. The footage recorded from shore was turned over to authorities and was not released publicly. In the years that followed, her children refused to enter open water. The shoreline remained outwardly unchanged, quiet, ordinary, and indistinguishable from the countless other days when the sea gave no warning at all. It was August 22nd, 2016, and the suffocating Florida heat had already claimed 2 lives that summer in Broward County. But Brenda Holloway was about to become the third casualty of a different kind of predator. Brenda Holloway, 62, had spent 37 years processing insurance claims before retiring to become the self-appointed guardian of homeowner association regulations. Brenda had earned her reputation through consistent enforcement of community standards. She carried a laminated copy of the HOA bylaws in her purse and had personally issued multiple violation notices in her 3 years of retirement. That Tuesday afternoon, Brenda had spotted a 15-year-old feeding ducks near the retention pond with a bag of bread. Witnesses said she marched across the perfectly maintained lawn. The teen had been visiting his grandmother in the community and was unaware of the feeding restrictions that Brenda enforced. When she confiscated his bread bag and began lecturing him about creating dependencies in wildlife, several residents emerged from their air-conditioned homes to watch the familiar scene unfold. The retention pond stretched across 2 acres of the community's center, its murky green surface disguising the ecosystem beneath. American alligators are perfectly adapted ambush predators, capable of remaining motionless for hours. Adults can reach lengths of 10 to 11 feet, still capable of lethal force. Once they secure prey, their instinct is to perform death rolls that disorient victims while tearing flesh and breaking bones. Likely determined to make her point about feeding restrictions, Brenda strode directly to the pond's edge with the confiscated bread bag. The water appeared calm, obscuring any movement beneath. Witnesses said she positioned herself on the concrete retaining wall, leaning forward to dispose of the bread by throwing it into the center of the pond, rather than near the shore where animals could access it. The attack came without warning as Brenda extended her arm over the water. An alligator surged forward from a shallow submerged shelf just below the retaining wall, its jaws clamping around her right forearm with devastating force. The impact knocked her off balance as the reptile's weight, later estimated by wildlife officers as consistent with an 11-foot animal, dragged her into the murky water. Her screams echoed across the community as the alligator submerged her almost immediately, initiating violent rolling movements consistent with predatory restraint behavior. Witnesses watched in horror as Brenda disappeared beneath the surface, the water churning violently around the thrashing forms. She resurfaced only for a matter of seconds, gasping and flailing with her left arm, blood spreading rapidly from catastrophic injuries to her right limb. The alligator maintained its grip, rolling again in short, forceful rotations that stripped tissue and fractured bone. Her desperate attempts to reach the concrete edge were futile against the reptile's overwhelming strength. She was pulled under again almost immediately, and the struggle ended. The entire attack lasted well under 2 minutes. The teenager ran to the nearest house and called 911. Deputies arrived within 12 minutes, followed by wildlife officers who brought specialized equipment for water recovery operations. The alligator had disappeared into the pond's depths with Brenda's body, forcing officers to wait until evening, when the reptile was more likely to surface. Brenda's remains were recovered at 7:30 p.m. after wildlife officers located and euthanized an alligator believed to be responsible for the attack. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from massive trauma and drowning. Tissue analysis confirmed that repeated feeding activity had habituated local alligators to human presence. The Palms at Cypress Creek installed reinforced fencing and restricted access barriers averaging 6 feet in height around the pond perimeter, and posted multiple warning signs in English and Spanish. Later safety reviews noted that years of residents feeding wildlife had created the dangerous conditions that led to Brenda's death, though no formal admission of liability was ever made public. It was May 3, 2017, and the African sun hung mercilessly over a private reserve, casting harsh shadows across the savannah, where a woman would draw her final breath beneath a predator's crushing jaws. Madison McCrae was a 27-year-old from Phoenix, Arizona, a retail worker, known among her co-workers for demanding manager attention over trivial issues and loudly insisting on better service. People said she had cultivated a sense of entitlement that extended to every aspect of her life. She had scraped together savings from part-time work to fund a South African safari, her first trip outside the United States, but she likely saw it less as a chance to explore wildlife and more as an opportunity to enforce her expectations on the world and to capture dramatic content for Instagram. Madison had booked the cheapest safari package available, yet the private reserve said she constantly complained that the accommodations and itinerary weren't up to standard. She frequently demanded exceptions from guides, snapping at them when things didn't match the experience she believed she was owed. Their guide had already spotted a pride of lions resting near a a seasonal watering hole, the massive male lying in the shade of a marula tree within established stalking distance, estimated at 80 to 100 yards from the vehicle. African lions are apex predators capable of reaching speeds of up to 40 miles per hour in short bursts, with males weighing up to 420 pounds and possessing jaws strong enough to collapse a large ungulate's windpipe within seconds. The guide had emphasized multiple times that morning that guests must remain in their vehicles at all times, explaining that lions view humans outside of vehicles as prey or territorial threats, rather than the non-threatening observers they appear to be when seated in safari trucks. Madison had listened to the safety briefing while scrolling through her phone, occasionally asking when they would get closer to the animals for better photos. The vehicle was stationary with the engine idling, positioned on open ground with no fencing or barriers. Guests remained seated, as required, while Johann momentarily turned his attention to a radio call. Madison immediately began complaining about the distance to the lions, arguing that her photos would be worthless from so far away. Other tourists were visibly uncomfortable as the guide tried to calm her down. She had noticed the male lion lying motionless and misinterpreted his stillness as deep sleep. Without permission and in direct violation of protocol, Madison stepped down from the vehicle, clutching her camera. Relying on proximity and her sudden movement alone, she moved several yards away from the truck, closing the distance further while the lion remained low and facing her. The male lion's response was immediate and terrifying. His head snapped up, locking onto Madison as she raised her camera well within the animal's ambush zone. Lions are ambush predators, and this male had already been positioned to stalk from close range. He rose to his feet with fluid, controlled power as Madison finally grasped the scale of her error. She turned to run, but witnesses said her boots slipped on loose gravel as the lion lunged forward. The lion covered the distance in seconds, his forepaws slamming into Madison's upper back and driving her face first into the ground. The lion clamped his jaws around Madison's throat, causing rapid incapacitation, followed by loss of consciousness. The pressure of the bite and the force of her fall caused catastrophic cervical trauma. Blood spread rapidly beneath her as the lion maintained his hold until her body went slack. The lion then seized Madison by the shoulder and dragged her toward a dense cluster of thorn bushes, a common behavior intended to secure a kill away from perceived threats and scavengers. The remaining guests watched in paralyzed silence as the lion stood over the body, his posture rigid and alert. The guide radioed park control immediately, his voice controlled as he reported a probable wildlife fatality and requested armed assistance. Armed rangers arrived approximately 14 minutes later. The lion was driven off using vehicles and warning shots, retreating into the brush before the team approached. Madison was pronounced dead at the scene. Her body was later transported for formal examination, which determined the cause of death to be asphyxiation due to tracheal collapse and massive vascular injury to the neck, with contributing blunt force trauma from the initial takedown. The reserve conducted a comprehensive review of its safety procedures. Investigators concluded that existing protocols had been followed and that Madison's decision to exit the vehicle and provoke the animal directly led to the fatal encounter. The death was ruled accidental. The lion was not euthanized, with authorities determining that the animal had behaved in accordance with natural instincts. It was July 22, 2016, and the murky waters of the Daintree River held secrets that had claimed lives for millennia. Secrets that Carla Wenrick would discover in the most horrific way possible as the ancient predator beneath the surface prepared for an attack. Carla was a 41-year-old human resources consultant from Sydney, known throughout her mid-tier consulting firm for her aggressive personality and relentless complaints about what she perceived as inadequate service. Her colleagues privately described her as someone who treated every interaction as a battle to be won. Carla had built her reputation on never backing down from confrontation, whether berating restaurant servers or demanding refunds from hotels. This trip to Queensland represented Carla's first real vacation in 3 years, funded by a recent promotion. Her colleagues said that she had specifically chosen the Daintree River cruise after reading online reviews that promised close encounters with saltwater crocodiles. Her stated goal was to capture dramatic photos for her social media account, which she used primarily to document her travels and criticize businesses that failed to meet her expectations. The Daintree River wound through ancient rainforest, where saltwater crocodiles had ruled as apex predators. These massive reptiles can grow up to 20 feet long and weigh well over a ton, with a bite force exceeding 3,700 pounds per square inch. Primarily ambush predators, saltwater crocodiles rely on stealth and positioning rather than pursuit, capable of explosive bursts of speed both in water and at the water's edge. The tour guide, Jamie, was a weathered local who had been running river cruises for 15 years without incident. That morning, he had specifically warned the 12 passengers about maintaining distance from the water and remaining seated at all times. He pointed out fresh slide marks on the muddy banks, evidence of large crocodiles moving between water and land, and explained that the river's murky water made it impossible to see submerged animals. Several passengers nodded seriously, but others noted Carla rolling her eyes and muttering audibly about overcautious tour guides. 20 minutes into the cruise, the guide said he spotted a massive saltwater crocodile floating near a fallen tree, its eyes and nostrils barely visible above the waterline. He estimated the animal at roughly 18 feet long, explaining to passengers that this was likely a territorial male. As the boat maintained a safe distance of about 50 yards, Carla became increasingly agitated, loudly complaining that they were too far away for good photos. She demanded that they move closer, dismissing the guide's explanations about safety protocols as gatekeeping wildlife. When other passengers began backing away from the railings as Jamie had instructed, Carla declared that crocodiles were lazy unless provoked. Despite repeated warnings, she stood up and moved to the boat's edge, leaning over the waist-high aluminum railing, her phone ready. Jamie immediately cut the engine and ordered Carla to sit down, stepping toward her and reaching for her arm, but she ignored him completely. Leaning farther over the railing, she began slapping the water's surface with her open palm, trying to provoke a reaction from the distant crocodile for her video. The other tourists watched in horror as she continued her aggressive behavior, some pleading with her to stop. Jamie restarted the engine in an attempt to back the boat away, but Carla had already drawn the attention of a predator that had silently repositioned beneath the surface, responding to vibration and disturbance. The attack came without warning. The crocodile had submerged and approached the boat underwater. In a single explosive movement, it surged upward from directly beneath where Carla leaned over the railing. The massive jaws, lined with over 60 conical teeth designed to grip and crush, clamped onto her lower torso. The force of the strike violently bent her body over the railing, pulling her center of mass toward the water. Witnesses later described hearing a loud cracking sound as the crocodile's jaws closed, consistent with severe skeletal trauma, later documented by the coroner. Blood spread rapidly across the water's surface as the predator initiated a death roll, a spinning maneuver used to disable and dismember prey. Based on the pattern of injuries, Carla's spine was believed to have fractured during the first rotation, her body twisting unnaturally as the crocodile's mass rolled through the water. Within seconds, she was dragged completely under, the churning water turning crimson as the crocodile continued its violent feeding behavior. Passengers watched in frozen horror as the water boiled with movement, occasional glimpses of the crocodile's massive tail breaking the surface. The attack lasted less than 30 seconds, from initial strike to final submersion, as estimated by multiple witnesses. Jamie immediately radioed emergency services. Several passengers reported that Carla's phone disappeared beneath the surface during the initial strike, leaving no usable footage of the attack. Marine rescue units arrived approximately 20 minutes later, but there was nothing to be done except begin a search. The crocodile had disappeared into the river's depths, behavior consistent with retreating to a submerged cache site. Carla's body was recovered the following day, lodged against a submerged branch nearly half a mile downstream. The coroner's report documented massive trauma to the torso and pelvis, with spiral fractures characteristic of rotational force, consistent with a crocodile death roll. Cause of death was listed as massive blood loss, with drowning as a contributing factor. The incident received only brief regional news coverage, with authorities emphasizing that the victim had ignored multiple safety warnings. The cruise operator implemented stricter physical enforcement of seating rules and clearer exclusion protocols, while Carla's family quietly deleted her social media accounts. It was September 11, 2016, in the Komodo National Park's Lo Liang sector, where the ancient predators that ruled these volcanic islands. The morning air shimmered with heat as tour groups gathered near the ranger station, unaware that within hours, the pristine wilderness would be stained with blood and the screams of a woman who believed rules were merely suggestions. Maribel Quayle was a 44-year-old purchasing coordinator from Perth, known among her colleagues for her stubborn independence and casual disregard for authority. She had booked a park-authorized but bare-bones group trek, drawn by photos of the famous Komodo dragons and determined to prove that expensive guided experiences were unnecessary for seasoned travelers. Her colleagues said Maribel prided herself on being practical and no-nonsense, dismissing what she called tourist theater, designed to extract extra fees from gullible visitors. Her travel stories, retold by friends and colleagues, documented a pattern of ignoring local warnings and guides, from swimming in restricted areas in Bali to hiking alone in remote parts of Thailand. This trip to Komodo was meant to be the crown jewel of her Southeast Asian adventure, and she had specifically chosen the lowest-cost tour tier permitted by the park, confident that her instincts would keep her safe where others needed supervision. Maribel arrived wearing bright red flip-flops and a dismissive attitude toward the mandatory safety briefing, standing at the back of the group and intermittently checking her phone, as rangers explained the dangers of the world's largest lizard species. Komodo dragons are not cooperative hunters, but multiple individuals are often independently drawn to the same bleeding prey. Komodo dragons are apex predators that can reach 9 to 10 feet in length and exceed 150 pounds, equipped with serrated teeth and venom glands that release anticoagulant compounds, compounding hemorrhage over minutes. While bacterial infection is no longer considered the primary killing mechanism, it remains a serious secondary risk. During the mandatory briefing, the head ranger had been explicit. Remain within approximately 15 to 20 feet of the guide at all times, never sit or crouch, and never leave the marked trail. He warned the group that an adult dragon had been observed moving through the area earlier that morning, increasing the likelihood of close encounters. Maribel scoffed when told her footwear was inappropriate, insisting she had worn flip-flops across Asia without incident. When Kadek warned that open wounds, bright colors, and strong scents could elevate risk, Maribel laughed audibly, dismissing the guidance. 20 minutes into the trek, as temperatures climbed past 95 degrees Fahrenheit, Maribel began lagging behind, complaining about the heat and the guide's pace. When the group paused to observe a dragon resting near a watering hole, Maribel noticed a shaded rocky outcrop about 50 yards away and announced she was going to sit there. The ranger ordered her to return immediately, but she waved him off and continued walking. She sat down, removed her flip-flops, and applied sunscreen. What Maribel didn't realize was that an adult Komodo dragon had been moving intermittently through this corridor since early morning, following residual scent trails from recent prey activity. The reptile emerged silently from a low scrub behind her. When Maribel noticed it, she attempted to shoo it away with her flip-flop, a gesture that registered as erratic movement. The dragon struck from a shallow shelf just below the retaining terrain, clamping onto her left foot. The serrated teeth sank into her skin as Maribel screamed. Venom-induced anticoagulation compounded the hemorrhage, causing her movements to slow within minutes. She fell backward as the dragon released and rebit before withdrawing briefly. Blood pooled beneath her as shock began to set in. As Maribel attempted to crawl, the blood scent attracted a second dragon, which arrived independently and struck in short, violent bursts. The attacks were brief, with the animals retreating between bites. Rangers eventually located her, positioned at a distance, used standard deterrence tools including forked control poles and shouted commands, protocols designed to redirect dragons without provoking escalation. They radioed for emergency response immediately, but limited visibility of the uneven volcanic terrain delayed access. Backup personnel reached the site approximately 35 minutes after the initial attack, by which time Maribel had no detectable pulse. She was transported by boat to Labuan Bajo, where she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as exsanguination following traumatic bite injuries with venom-induced anticoagulation. Maribel's funeral was held quietly in Perth a week later, attended by close family and a few colleagues who described her as adventurous but headstrong. The incident received brief local coverage, with park officials reiterating that the victim's decision to leave the group directly violated safety protocol. Tours resumed weeks later without structural changes. It was October 3rd, 2014, and the moonless night around Lake Naivasha would witness the brutal consequences of human arrogance, as Mauricio Otieno learned too late that hippos kill more people in Africa than any other large mammal, their massive jaws designed to crush boats and bones with equal efficiency. Maris was a 52-year-old operations manager at one of Lake Naivasha's largest flower farms, a position she had held for 8 years, through a combination of aggressive management and cost-cutting measures that impressed foreign investors. Known among workers for her impatience with what she considered excuses, Maris had built her reputation on solving problems through direct action rather than accommodation. Her workers described her as someone who viewed wildlife as obstacles to productivity, frequently complaining about the hippos that crossed farm property nightly on their way between grazing areas and the lake. The flower export business was highly competitive, and her workers said she prided herself on maintaining schedules that other farms couldn't match. Recent hippo activity had damaged irrigation lines and trampled flower beds, costing the farm thousands of dollars in lost revenue. Maris had grown increasingly frustrated with what she saw as the workers' passive acceptance of the situation. When the farm's wildlife service liaison suggested installing barriers and lighting to redirect the hippo's path, Maris dismissed the recommendation as expensive and unnecessary. Instead, she had ordered workers to use emergency flares and noisemakers to drive the animals away from the farm's main pathways. She wanted to establish human dominance over the hippos and force them to find alternative routes that wouldn't impact production. Lake Naivasha's shoreline was dotted with papyrus reeds and acacia trees, creating a maze of paths that hippos had used for generations to move between water and grazing areas. Hippos are among Africa's most dangerous animals, with adult bulls weighing up to 8,000 pounds and possessing jaws that can open to 150 degrees, revealing canine teeth up to 20 inches long. Their bite force exceeds 1,800 pounds per square inch, easily capable of snapping a canoe in half or crushing human bones to powder. Farm workers had repeatedly warned Maris that harassing hippos was dangerous, explaining that the animals became increasingly aggressive when their established paths were disrupted. The night security guard, a local man named Joseph Kamau, had specifically told her that recent flare harassment had made the hippos more unpredictable and territorial. Earlier that week, workers had reported seeing a large bull hippo lingering near the farm's main pathway instead of returning directly to the lake after grazing. Fresh dung and deep hoof prints in the mud indicated the animal was spending more time in the area, a behavioral change that experienced locals recognized as a warning sign. On the night of October 3rd, Maris decided to personally oversee the harassment operation, bringing 3 workers and Kamau to the main pathway where hippos typically crossed around midnight. She carried a powerful flashlight and 2 emergency flares, instructing the team to spread out along a 200-foot section of the path. Against Kamau's advice, Maris positioned herself at the front of the group, approximately 50 feet ahead of the others. When the familiar sound of hippos moving through the reeds became audible around 11:45 p.m., she immediately lit a flare and began advancing toward the noise, waving the bright flame and shouting to drive the animals away. The workers behind her watched as Maris's flashlight beams swept back and forth through the tall grass beside the path. For several minutes, the hippos seemed to retreat toward the lake, their heavy breathing and splashing growing more distant. Kamau called for Maris to return to the group, but she continued forward, determined to ensure the hippos had completely abandoned the area. Suddenly, the workers saw Maris's flashlight suddenly stop moving. In the silence that followed, they heard a deep, explosive exhale, the warning sound hippos make before attacking. Before anyone could react, a massive bull hippo charged from the tall grass at close range, its enormous bulk moving with shocking speed, despite weighing between 6,000 to 8,000 pounds. The attack was swift and devastating. 2 workers witnessed the hippo strike Maris down with its massive head. She fell backward onto the muddy path as the bull reared up, its cavernous mouth opening. In a single crushing bite, the hippo clamped its jaws across Maris's waist. The hippo's bite force catastrophically crushed her pelvis and lower spine, causing her lower body to go completely limp, while her torso remained trapped in the animal's massive jaws, Maris's body becoming increasingly mangled with each violent movement. Within moments, the hippo neutralized the perceived threat, delivering additional crushing bites to her torso and abdomen. The witnesses watched in frozen horror as Maris's body was thrown aside, her clothing torn and soaked with blood, the bull snorting loudly as it asserted control over the pathway. The entire attack lasted in under a minute. After disabling and killing the intruder, the hippo retreated toward the lake, leaving behind a severely mutilated body and a spreading pool of blood on the muddy path. Kamau began running toward the farm buildings to call for help. Farm security contacted emergency services immediately. but responders didn't arrive for nearly 30 minutes due to the remote location and poor road conditions. By then, there was little to recover, except extensive traumatic injuries and scattered personal effects. The coroner's report noted massive trauma to the torso and abdomen, with the cause of death listed as exsanguination and crushing injuries consistent with a hippo attack. The incident was ruled a case of wildlife provocation, with authorities noting that harassment of hippos violated wildlife service guidelines. The flower farm installed barriers and lighting along hippo pathways and implemented strict policies prohibiting worker interaction with wildlife.
The afternoon of June 15, 2014 brought perfect golden hour lighting to Kruger National Park, South Africa. For Cheryl Whitfield, 52, a successful Scottsdale real estate agent, this would become her final photo session. Cheryl had booked this expensive private safari tour for her 25th wedding anniversary, spending nearly $20,000 on what she considered a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Having grown up watching nature documentaries and visiting zoos, she felt more prepared for African wildlife than most other tourists, though her actual experience was limited to photographing deer in Arizona state parks. Her safari guide Thabo was a seasoned professional with over 15 years of experience who had initially been impressed by Cheryl's enthusiasm. However, as the day progressed, he grew concerned by her increasing frustration with safety protocols and her tendency to question his expertise. She had already pushed boundaries twice that morning, stepping out of the vehicle briefly for photos despite his warnings. At 4:45 p.m., their vehicle approached a pride of lions resting beneath acacia trees. The magnificent cats were in their element. A dominant male, several females, and cubs scattered in the dappled shade. Cheryl's excitement was palpable as she raised her expensive camera, snapping photos through the open vehicle window while expressing frustration about the distance between them and the lions. Thabo explained that they were already at the optimal distance for both safety and photography, noting that the pride was showing signs of alertness. He pointed out the male's posture and the way several females had lifted their heads, subtle signs that experienced guides learned to read. But Cheryl had spent her career overcoming obstacles and finding solutions when others said something was impossible. Looking at the distance between the vehicle and the lions, she made a calculation that would prove fatal. Her hand moved toward the door handle as she rationalized that her experience with animals and careful approach would keep her safe. African lions are apex predators that have ruled the savannah for millennia. A dominant male can weigh up to 420 pounds and possesses a bite force of over 650 pounds per square inch, powerful enough to crush the skull of a buffalo. When their territory is invaded or they perceive a threat, their predatory instincts override any tolerance they might have developed for human presence. Before Thabo could physically stop her, Cheryl had opened the door and stepped onto the African soil. She moved slowly and deliberately, her camera raised, genuinely believing that her careful approach would keep her safe. She had seen countless nature documentaries where photographers worked near big cats, and she convinced herself that this was no different. The dominant male lion had been resting but was immediately alert to this new development. Lions are territorial animals with finely tuned threat assessment abilities, and the approach of this upright, unfamiliar creature triggered millions of years of evolutionary programming. Cheryl managed to take several photos, feeling vindicated as the lion seemed to tolerate her presence. She called back to the vehicle, expressing her belief that the animals weren't bothered by her presence, and that she had successfully demonstrated that they weren't threatened by her approach. But she had misread the situation entirely. The male's stillness wasn't tolerance. It was the focused attention of a predator, calculating distance and timing. When Cheryl took 2 more steps closer to frame a better shot, she crossed an invisible boundary that the lion had established. The charge came with explosive power that covered 30 yards in under 4 seconds. Cheryl's scream of terror cut through the African air as she realized her fatal miscalculation. But there was no time to run, no time to retreat to the vehicle. The massive predator struck her with devastating force, his powerful jaws clamping down as she was knocked to the ground. Thabo immediately fired warning shots and started the engine, but the lion's predatory instincts had fully engaged. The attack was swift and decisive, lasting less than 2 minutes, but seeming like an eternity to the horrified witnesses. The incident sparked international media attention and led to mandatory vehicle locks on all safari vehicles in South Africa. Cheryl's husband filed the wrongful death lawsuit against the tour company, which was ultimately dismissed when investigators determined that Thabo had followed all proper safety protocols. The morning of August 3, 2015 dawned crisp and clear in Yellowstone National Park, Wyoming. For Tiffany Patterson, 48, a successful Denver marketing executive, this beautiful morning would become her last. Tiffany had arrived at Yellowstone with her family 3 days earlier for what was supposed to be a relaxing vacation, but she had grown increasingly frustrated with what she perceived as extensive restrictions. She had already received 2 warnings from rangers, one for approaching elk too closely while trying to get better photos, and one for leaving a designated trail to reach a better viewpoint. Each warning had reinforced her belief that park regulations were overly cautious and designed more for liability protection than actual safety. At 7:20 a.m., while hiking the scenic Fairy Falls Trail with her reluctant family, Tiffany encountered something that would test her confidence in the most brutal way possible. Through a clearing in the dense forest, she spotted a female grizzly bear with 2 small cubs, peacefully foraging for berries in a sun-dappled meadow about 60 yards away. Her first instinct was actually appropriate. She stopped walking and quietly pointed out the bears to her family. For a moment, she stood in genuine awe of the magnificent animals. But as she watched other hikers taking photos from a safe distance with telephoto lenses, Tiffany began to feel frustrated by the limitations of her phone camera. The bears looked tiny in her photos, and she knew her friends back home would be disappointed by the distant, unclear images. She whispered to her husband about getting closer for better photos, but he immediately grabbed her arm and reminded her about the ranger's warnings regarding mother bears with cubs. She paused, genuinely considering his words. The mandatory safety briefing had been clear about the dangers of approaching bears, especially mothers with young. But looking at the peaceful scene in front of her, with the bears calmly foraging and showing no signs of aggression, she convinced herself that the warnings were generic precautions that didn't apply to this specific situation. Grizzly bears are among North America's most formidable predators, with adult females weighing between 200 and 400 pounds and possessing strength that defies imagination. A grizzly's claws can grow up to 4 inches long and are powerful enough to tear through tree bark and dig through frozen ground. But it's their protective instinct toward their cubs that makes them truly deadly. A mother grizzly will attack anything she perceives as a threat to her offspring. Tiffany assured her husband she would be careful and would stop if the bears even looked at her. She pulled out her phone and expressed her desire to capture just one good photo to show people back home. She began walking slowly toward the meadow, genuinely trying to be respectful and non-threatening. Her approach was cautious and deliberate, and for the first 20 yards, the bear seemed unaware of her presence. This reinforced her belief that she was handling the situation correctly. But as she moved within 30 yards of the bear's family, the mother grizzly's head lifted from her foraging. The massive female had been aware of the human presence from the beginning, but had initially chosen to ignore it while keeping herself positioned between the potential threat and her cubs. Tiffany stopped when she saw the bear looking at her, raising her phone to capture what she thought would be the perfect shot. She whispered about how incredible the moment was, not realizing that her voice was carrying across the meadow. The mother grizzly's ears flattened against her skull, a warning sign that Tiffany didn't recognize. The bear took several steps toward her, and Tiffany, instead of backing away, stood her ground and continued taking photos, interpreting the bear's movement as curiosity rather than a threat display. When Tiffany took 3 more steps forward to get an even better angle, the protective mother had seen enough. With a roar that echoed through the forest, she charged at full speed toward the woman who had ignored every warning signal and positioned herself as a threat to her cubs. Grizzly bears can reach speeds of up to 35 miles per hour, faster than any human could ever hope to run, and this mother was driven by the most powerful force in nature, the need to protect her young. Tiffany's attempt to run triggered the bear's chase instinct, the worst possible response in a grizzly encounter. The attack occurred in a dense forest where her screams were muffled by towering pines. Despite the immediate response from park rangers who had been monitoring the area due to recent bear activity, Tiffany sustained fatal injuries from an animal that was simply following millions of years of evolutionary programming to protect her offspring. Tiffany's death led to the most comprehensive overhaul of Yellowstone's visitor safety protocols in the park's history. Her family filed a federal lawsuit against the National Park Service, which was ultimately settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. The evening of March 12, 2016 brought spectacular sunset conditions to Cairns, Queensland, Australia. For Bethany Rodriguez, 44, a successful insurance claim manager from Phoenix, Arizona, this would become her final swim. Bethany had arrived at the upscale resort 3 days earlier with sky-high expectations and an attitude that had already made her notorious among the staff. As someone who prided herself on always getting her way through persistence and complaints, she had spent every moment since arrival demanding upgrades, special treatment, and access to areas that other guests simply accepted as off-limits. Her husband Mark had grown increasingly embarrassed by her behavior, watching helplessly as she berated housekeeping staff for not providing enough towels, demanding that the restaurant kitchen prepare meals that weren't on the menu, and insisted that the concierge personally escort her to every activity. The main pool situation had become her first major battleground. When she complained loudly to the pool attendant about children splashing near her, demanding they be moved to a different area, she was politely told that the pool was open to all guests. This response triggered her immediate escalation to the manager, where she spent 20 minutes explaining her status as a premium guest and her expectation of adult-only pool time. When that failed, she turned her attention to the beach access, arguing with lifeguards about the designated swimming areas and insisting that the roped-off sections were just suggestions rather than actual boundaries. She had already been warned twice about swimming outside the safe zone, each time responding with lectures about her swimming abilities and her rights as a paying customer. But it was the beautiful secluded lagoon visible from her balcony that became her obsession. She had approached the staff multiple times, each interaction becoming more heated as she was repeatedly told the area was completely off limits due to wildlife dangers. She had cornered the resort manager that morning, demanding to know exactly what wildlife posed such a threat that paying guests couldn't access what was clearly part of the resort property. When told about saltwater crocodiles, she had laughed dismissively and pulled out her phone to show him statistics about crocodile attacks, explaining that she had done her research and knew the actual risks were minimal. The area in question was a pristine mangrove lagoon, separated from the resort by multiple barriers and warning signs. Danger signs were posted in English, Japanese, and German, along with detailed explanations about the saltwater crocodiles that inhabited these waters. At 6:30 p.m., as the golden hour light began to fade, Bethany made her move. She had changed into her most expensive swimsuit and brought her waterproof phone to document what she planned to present as evidence of the resort's excessive caution. She found a section where the fencing had been damaged by recent storms, creating a gap that allowed access without actually breaking any physical barriers. Saltwater crocodiles are among the world's most efficient predators, virtually unchanged by millions of years of evolution. These apex predators can grow up to 23 feet in length and weigh over a ton, with a bite force of 3,700 pounds per square inch, the strongest of any living animal. She floated peacefully for nearly 10 minutes, watching tropical birds in the mangrove canopy above and composing the triumphant social media posts she would share. What Bethany didn't know was that a 14-foot saltwater crocodile had been hunting in the deeper sections of the lagoon when she entered the water. The massive reptile had detected her presence immediately through vibrations in the water and had been slowly positioning itself for an optimal attack angle. The attack came without warning, a sudden, violent eruption of water as the crocodile launched himself from the depths with explosive force. Bethany's scream was cut short as massive jaws clamped down with crushing power, and the water churned violently as the predator executed his death roll, a technique perfected over millions of years of evolution. Within moments, the lagoon returned to an eerie calm, broken only by ripples that quickly faded in the evening breeze. Resort security, alerted by guests who had heard Bethany's brief scream and the violent churning of water, found only her belongings on the shore and her phone floating in the lagoon, still recording her final moments. Bethany's death triggered the largest tourism safety investigation in Queensland's history. Her husband filed a massive lawsuit resulting in a $12 million settlement, the largest tourism-related payout in Australian history. The settlement led to mandatory crocodile proofing of all resort properties within 50 kilometers of known crocodile habitats, costing the tourism industry over $200 million in infrastructure upgrades. The afternoon of July 28, 2017 brought ideal hiking conditions to Olympic National Park, Washington. For Heather Thompson, 50, a successful corporate trainer from Seattle, this would become her final opportunity to prove her superiority over what she considered incompetent government bureaucrats and their ridiculous safety regulations. Heather had built her business on the premise that she knew better than everyone else how to provide authentic wilderness experiences. Her corporate retreats were marketed specifically to executives and professionals who were tired of being treated like children by overly cautious park services and tour operators. She was leading 8 office colleagues on what she had designed as an elite leadership retreat, constantly reminding them that they were getting an experience that went far beyond what ordinary tourists received. Her group consisted of accountants, marketing professionals, and middle managers who had paid premium prices for what Heather promised would be an authentic wilderness challenge. From the moment they arrived at Olympic National Park, Heather had been vocal about her disdain for what she called government overreach in wilderness management. She had spent the entire drive to the trailhead explaining to her guests how park rangers were typically inexperienced college graduates who had never actually spent serious time in real wilderness situations, unlike herself. The trouble began when they reached the official trailhead and encountered fresh warnings about recent black bear activity in the area. Multiple signs warned hikers to stay on designated trails, make noise while hiking, and report any bear sightings immediately. Heather's reaction was immediate and predictable. She rolled her eyes dramatically and launched into one of her signature lectures about government incompetence. She gathered her group around her and began explaining, in her most condescending tone, how these warnings were typical examples of bureaucratic overreach designed to keep people dependent on guided tours and official programs. She made sure her clients understood that following these restrictive warnings would mean missing out on the authentic leadership experience they had paid premium prices to receive. 5:15 p.m., after delivering another lecture about how real outdoor professionals like herself knew how to assess actual risks versus bureaucratic paranoia, Heather made the decision to take her group onto an unmarked trail. When they encountered fresh black bear tracks and scat on the trail, Heather's response was entirely predictable. She gathered her nervous clients around the evidence and began another impromptu lecture about how this was exactly the kind of thing that would send less qualified guides running back to the safety of designated trails. Black bears are North America's most common bear species, typically weighing between 200 and 400 pounds, but capable of reaching 600 pounds during peak feeding season. While generally more timid than grizzlies, black bears become extremely aggressive when defending food sources or feeling cornered. A 250-pound male black bear had been feeding in a rich berry patch nearby, building up the fat reserves he would need to survive the coming winter hibernation. When he heard the loud, confident voice of Heather explaining bear behavior to her group, particularly her dismissive comments about park ranger competence, his defensive instincts immediately activated. The encounter happened suddenly but not without warning. The bear emerged from dense undergrowth about 40 yards ahead of the group, clearly agitated by their presence in his territory during the critical feeding season. Instead of immediately implementing proper bear safety protocols, Heather saw this as the perfect teaching moment to demonstrate her superior wilderness expertise. She positioned herself between the bear and her clients, speaking in what she believed was an authoritative tone about proper bear encounter techniques. She explained to her terrified group that this was exactly the kind of authentic wildlife experience that made her services superior to sanitized park tours. For several tense minutes, the standoff continued. The bear showed classic defensive behavior, huffing, jaw-popping, and making short bluff charges that stopped well short of the group. But instead of recognizing these as serious escalation warnings, Heather treated them as validation of her expertise, continuing to lecture her clients about bear behavior and wilderness leadership principles. Her voice grew louder and more authoritative as she demonstrated what she called proper bear dominance techniques, completely misreading the animal's increasingly agitated state. She explained that the bear was simply testing their resolve and that maintaining confident leadership would cause him to retreat. The situation deteriorated rapidly when one of her clients, panicked by the bear's increasingly aggressive bluff charges, broke from the group and ran. This triggered the bear's chase instinct, and the 250-pound predator immediately pursued the fleeing human. Heather, still convinced of her expertise, ran toward the bear while shouting instructions about proper bear encounter techniques. The bear, now fully committed to protecting his territory, turned on Heather with the full force of an animal that recognized no human authority or self-proclaimed expertise. Her final moments were spent discovering that her superiority complex and dismissive attitude towards safety warnings had not actually made her the wilderness expert she believed herself to be. The attack occurred in a thick forest during the bear's peak foraging time. While her sacrifice did allow her fleeing client to escape, and her group's panicked screaming eventually drove the bear away, Heather sustained injuries that proved fatal, despite immediate first aid attempts and rapid evacuation by helicopter rescue teams. Heather's death resulted in the most significant changes to commercial wilderness guiding regulations in Washington state history, ironically implementing exactly the kind of government oversight she had spent her career opposing. Her corporate training business was continued by her business partner, who transformed it into a wilderness safety education company that now emphasizes the importance of respecting both wildlife and the expertise of Park Service professionals. The afternoon of November 5, 2013 brought unreasonably warm weather to rural Oklahoma. For Stephanie Stevens, 46, a successful pharmaceutical sales representative from Atlanta, this would become her final volunteer session. Stephanie had discovered a genuine love for wildlife conservation and had been volunteering at a small roadside zoo facility for over a year, contributing both time and substantial financial support to help care for rescued exotic animals. Unlike many roadside operations, this facility focused on education and rescue rather than entertainment. Her pharmaceutical background had proven valuable to the facility. She understood animal medications and had helped establish better veterinary care protocols. Her social media presence had gradually shifted toward wildlife education as she learned more about conservation challenges. The facility owner, David, had initially been grateful for Stephanie's expertise and financial support. She had helped fund improved enclosures, better veterinary care, and educational programs. However, as her involvement deepened, she had begun requesting increased access to the animals for educational content creation, pushing against safety protocols that David knew were essential. Her relationship with Raja, the facility's Bengal tiger, had developed over months of careful interaction through barriers. She had studied tiger behavior extensively and had created educational content that helped people understand the complexity of big cat behavior and the challenges of caring for these magnificent predators in captivity. At 3:45 p.m., Stephanie arrived for what she planned as a routine volunteer session, but she had been increasingly frustrated by the limitations on her ability to create the kind of educational content she believed could make a real difference in wildlife conservation awareness. Her social media following had grown substantially, and she felt the responsibility to provide increasingly engaging content. As they walked toward Raja's enclosure, Stephanie brought up her ideas for an educational video series with David. She expressed her belief that her followers were responding well to the tiger content, and they could reach more people by showing more authentic interactions with the animals. Bengal tigers are among the world's most powerful predators, with males weighing up to 660 pounds and possessing a bite force of over 1,000 pounds per square inch. Their canine teeth can grow up to 3 inches long, perfectly designed for puncturing the thick hide of large prey, while their retractable claws can extend up to 4 inches and are sharp enough to tear through muscle and bone with ease. Despite their beauty and apparent calm in captivity, tigers retain all the instincts of apex predators. Stephanie suggested working in the secondary area that day, referring to the space where food was prepared, separated from Raja's primary habitat by reinforced barriers. She proposed filming educational content about feeding protocols and tiger nutrition, emphasizing that it wouldn't be different from what they had done before. David hesitated. The secondary area was technically safe. It had been designed for exactly this kind of educational work, with multiple barriers between humans and the tiger. Stephanie had worked in that space before without incident, and her educational content had genuinely helped people understand the complexities of tiger care and conservation. Against his better judgment, influenced by Stephanie's track record and genuine expertise, David agreed to allow her into the secondary enclosure area. It was a decision based on trust built over months of successful collaboration, but it failed to account for the subtle changes in Raja's behavior. Stephanie entered the secondary area with her camera equipment, genuinely excited about creating content that would help people understand the daily realities of caring for a tiger in captivity. Raja watched her movements with what appeared to be his usual calm interest, showing no obvious signs of agitation. She began explaining to her camera about the meal preparation area, describing how much planning went into feeding a tiger properly, and educating viewers about the complexities involved in proper tiger nutrition and care. Raja's amber eyes tracked her movements with the calculated gaze that marked him as an apex predator. Tigers are solitary animals with an acute sense of territory, and subtle changes in their environment or routine can trigger responses that even experienced handlers don't always anticipate. The fatal moment came when Stephanie, focused on her educational presentation, moved closer to the primary barrier than she had ever done before. She wasn't being reckless. She was simply trying to get a better camera angle to show the feeding setup. But to Raja, her proximity to his primary territory during his afternoon rest period triggered instincts that had been suppressed but never eliminated by years in captivity. The tiger's response was instantaneous. His massive paw struck through the barrier with lightning speed, his claws extending to their full length as he grabbed Stephanie's arm. The attack triggered every alarm system in the facility as David activated emergency protocols, but Raja's size and power made immediate intervention extremely difficult. By the time they managed to secure Raja and reach Stephanie, she had sustained injuries that proved fatal, despite immediate medical attention and rapid transport to a trauma center. The attack lasted less than 3 minutes, but it demonstrated the awesome power of an apex predator whose wild instincts remained unchanged despite years of careful handling. Stephanie's death became the catalyst for the most comprehensive federal investigation of exotic animal facilities in U.S. history. David faced federal charges for operating without proper permits and was sentenced to 2 years in prison. The facility was permanently closed, and all animals were relocated to accredited sanctuaries.
The morning of June 15, 2013 dawned with perfect conditions across the South African savanna. Golden sunlight filtered through scattered acacia trees, painting the landscape in warm amber hues as a gentle breeze carried the earthy scent of the African bush. The temperature was a comfortable 75 degrees, with clear skies stretching endlessly over the vast wilderness. For most visitors to the private safari reserve, this would be a day of wonder and discovery, filled with breathtaking wildlife encounters and memories to last a lifetime. But for Karen Whitfield, a 52-year-old retail manager from Phoenix, it would become her final day on Earth. Karen embodied everything wrong with entitled tourism, a demanding retail manager who treated every situation like a customer service complaint. She had zero respect for local guides and treated them like servants she could boss around. Her husband watched helplessly as she berated their guide Thabo about everything from the accommodations to the food, constantly reminding everyone about her expensive safari package as if it gave her ownership of the African wilderness itself. She complained about the early morning wake-up calls, criticized the quality of the binoculars provided, and demanded special treatment at every turn. Other guests at the lodge had already begun avoiding her after just 2 days, tired of her constant negativity and entitled behavior. Thabo, an experienced guide with 15 years of leading safaris, had dealt with difficult tourists before, but Karen's behavior was particularly grating. She questioned his knowledge of animal behavior, demanded he drive closer to dangerous animals for better photos, and treated him like a chauffeur rather than a skilled professional. She had already complained to the lodge management twice about his service, threatening to leave negative reviews online if her demands weren't met immediately. At 4:20 p.m. during the golden hour game drive when animals are most active, Karen spotted a magnificent male lion resting 100 yards away under the shade of a massive baobab tree. The lion was part of a pride that included 3 lionesses and several cubs, all visible in the distance. When Guide Thabo explained they needed to maintain distance for safety, following strict park regulations designed to protect both visitors and wildlife, Karen's entitled rage exploded. She screamed about her expensive safari package and demanded closer access, grabbing the radio in an attempt to contact management. When Thabo tried to explain lion behavior and the very real dangers of approaching too closely, she dismissed his expertise with the same condescending attitude she used on difficult customers. African lions are apex predators with jaws capable of exerting up to 1,000 pounds of pressure per square inch, enough to crush bones with ease. Male lions, weighing up to 420 pounds, are fiercely territorial and will attack anything they perceive as a threat to their pride or domain. Their roar can be heard from 5 miles away, serving as both a territorial marker and a way to communicate with pride members across vast distances. But when they attack, they move with deadly silence and explosive speed, capable of covering short distances at up to 50 miles per hour. Their retractable claws, up to 1.5 inches long, are designed for gripping prey, while their powerful hindquarters provide the strength needed to bring down animals much larger than themselves. Karen opened the vehicle door and stepped out, declaring her intention to get her money's worth from the expensive safari experience. Her husband grabbed desperately at her arm, pleading with her to get back in the vehicle. But she shook him off with the same dismissive attitude she used on anyone who challenged her authority. The 400-pound male lion, already agitated by the vehicle's presence and the loud voices, perceived her aggressive approach as a territorial challenge. Lions are hardwired to respond to threats with immediate violence, especially when protecting their pride. The attack was swift and decisive, a blur of tawny muscle and razor-sharp claws that covered the distance between them in mere seconds. Karen's husband screamed from the vehicle as the lion brought her down just yards from where she'd stood, her entitled demands replaced by brief, terrible sounds that echoed across the savanna before being abruptly silenced. The lion remained with his kill, preventing any immediate rescue attempts. his powerful jaws having delivered a fatal bite to her neck within moments of the attack. Other vehicles in the area immediately radioed for help, but the lion's protective instincts kept him near the body, growling menacingly at any approach. Rangers arrived 45 minutes later with tranquilizer equipment, but Karen had died from massive trauma within minutes of the attack, her body bearing the unmistakable marks of the king of beasts. August 3, 2014 brought sweltering heat to Coral Springs, Florida, with temperatures soaring into the mid-90s and humidity thick enough to cut with a knife. The oppressive weather was perfect for pool parties, and Brenda Patterson, a 45-year-old real estate agent from Tampa, was in her element. Her canal front home buzzed with preparation for her annual summer pool party, complete with floating decorations, a fully stocked bar, and catered appetizers. The sun blazed overhead as she made final adjustments to the party setup, but Brenda had no idea she was about to host a guest that would turn her celebration into a nightmare of prehistoric proportions. Brenda was the epitome of high-maintenance entitlement, known throughout her upscale neighborhood for her demanding personality and belief that money could solve any problem. A successful real estate agent who loved hosting elaborate pool parties, she was known for her belief that rules didn't apply to her. She regularly ignored wildlife warnings and HOA regulations, particularly about feeding the alligators that lived in the canal behind her property. To Brenda, these prehistoric predators were just another amenity to enhance her guests' experience, like floating pool lights or a well-stocked bar. She had been warned multiple times by wildlife officers about the dangers of feeding alligators, but she dismissed their concerns as government overreach. Her neighbors had complained repeatedly about her reckless behavior, watching in horror as she tossed chicken scraps and leftover food into the canal after each party. She would dismiss anyone who expressed concern, completely ignoring the fact that alligators were responsible for numerous attacks in Florida each year. Her homeowners association had fined her twice for wildlife violations, but she simply paid the fines and continued her dangerous practices, viewing them as a cost of doing business. At 8:45 p.m., with 20 guests enjoying her party and the sun beginning to set over the canal, a 12-foot alligator emerged from the water onto her pool deck, an area where she'd been throwing chicken scraps for months. The massive reptile, weighing nearly 500 pounds, moved with surprising grace despite its bulk, its prehistoric eyes scanning the crowd of panicking party guests. When guests panicked and started screaming, running toward the house and away from the pool area, Brenda marched toward the massive reptile with a pool skimmer, shouting at it to leave her property. She began hitting the water near the alligator, demanding it leave her party like she was ejecting an unruly guest who had overstayed their welcome. American alligators are living fossils that first appeared 37 million years ago, surviving the extinction event that killed the dinosaurs through their incredible adaptability and predatory efficiency. Their bite force reaches 2,125 pounds per square inch in large males, strong enough to crush a turtle shell or snap a human bone like a twig. When threatened or defending territory, they can lunge forward at speeds up to 25 miles per hour on land, despite their seemingly sluggish appearance. Their powerful tails, making up nearly half their body length, serve as both propulsion in water and devastating weapons on land. The alligator, conditioned to associate humans with food after months of Brenda's illegal feeding and now being threatened with aggressive behavior, perceived her actions as a challenge to its territory. Alligators are opportunistic predators that will attack anything they perceive as prey or threat, and Brenda's aggressive approach triggered its predatory instincts. The massive reptile lunged forward with explosive speed that belied its prehistoric appearance, its powerful legs propelling its bulk across the deck faster than Brenda could react. Brenda tried to run but slipped on the wet deck, her designer heels betraying her in the moment she needed them most. The alligator's massive jaws, lined with 80 razor-sharp teeth designed for gripping and tearing, clamped down with bone-crushing force around her torso. The impact alone was devastating, but the alligator immediately began pulling her toward the water's edge, where it could perform its signature death roll. Guests called 911 from inside the house, but Brenda died from catastrophic injuries within minutes, her pool party ending in a nightmare that would haunt her guests forever and serve as a grim reminder of why wildlife feeding laws exist. May 18, 2016 brought crisp mountain air and crystal clear skies to Glacier National Park, Montana. Fresh snow capped the distant peaks, while wildflowers dotted the lower meadows in brilliant splashes of purple, yellow, and red. The temperature was a perfect 68 degrees, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers across the alpine landscape. The Highline Trail stretched ahead like a ribbon through paradise, offering breathtaking views that drew hikers from around the world to experience one of America's most spectacular wilderness areas. For Susan Hartwell, a 48-year-old corporate HR director from Denver, it should have been a perfect day for hiking with her book club. Instead, it would become the day she learned that nature doesn't respond to corporate authority or performance reviews. Susan was an overbearing HR director who micromanaged everything and everyone around her, treating every situation like a corporate meeting that needed her immediate supervision and control. She was hiking with her book club, constantly criticizing the trail conditions, other hikers, and park management like she was conducting a performance review of the entire National Park Service. Despite having no wilderness experience beyond occasional walks in city parks, she acted like an expert on everything from trail maintenance to wildlife management, treating the national park like her personal corporate campus, where her word was law and everyone else was an incompetent employee. Her book club members had grown increasingly frustrated with her behavior over the 3-day hiking trip. She had complained about everything from the quality of the trail markers to the appearance of the park rangers, demanding to speak with supervisors at every visitor center they encountered. She criticized other hikers for their pace, their equipment choices, and their photography techniques, offering unsolicited advice with the same condescending tone she used in corporate meetings. Several members of her group had already discussed cutting the trip short just to escape her constant negativity and need to control every aspect of their wilderness experience. At 2:15 p.m., while hiking the Highline Trail with spectacular views of the Continental Divide spread out before them, Susan's group encountered a female grizzly with 2 cubs foraging 75 yards ahead in a meadow filled with glacier lilies. The bears were engaged in natural feeding behavior, completely unaware of the human presence until the hiking group came into view. Guide instructions were crystal clear. Back away slowly, make noise to alert the bear of their presence, and give the animals plenty of space to retreat. Instead, Susan pushed past her terrified group, pulling out her phone and declaring her intention to photograph the bears, citing the park entrance fee she had paid. When the 350-pound sow stood on her hind legs in a defensive display, trying to get a better view of the potential threat, Susan actually stepped closer, shouting at the bear to cooperate with her photography session. Grizzly bears are among North America's most formidable predators, with adult females weighing up to 400 pounds and males reaching 600 pounds of pure muscle and bone-crushing power. Their claws grow up to 4 inches long and are designed for digging roots and tearing apart logs in search of insects, but they're equally effective at tearing apart anything they perceive as a threat. When protecting cubs, a mother grizzly becomes one of the most dangerous animals on the continent, capable of charging at 35 miles per hour and delivering swipes powerful enough to break a human's spine with a single blow. Mother bears with cubs are responsible for the majority of fatal bear attacks, as their protective instincts override any natural fear of humans. The protective mother grizzly, seeing Susan's aggressive approach toward her cubs, interpreted the behavior as a direct threat to her offspring. Bears communicate through body language, and Susan's forward movement and loud vocalizations were the exact opposite of what the bear needed to see to feel safe. The massive sow dropped to all fours and charged at 35 miles per hour, covering the distance between them in seconds with the unstoppable force of a freight train. Susan attempted to assert her authority even as the massive bear knocked her down with a single powerful swipe that shattered multiple ribs and punctured her lung. The attack was brief but devastating. The bear delivered several crushing blows with her massive paws before retreating with her cubs, having neutralized what she perceived as a threat to her offspring. Susan's injuries were immediately fatal, her corporate authority meaningless against 400,000 years of maternal instinct and evolutionary programming. Her book club members, following proper protocol, had backed away to a safe distance and survived to tell the tale, though they would be forever traumatized by witnessing nature's brutal efficiency. Rangers arrived within an hour to find Susan's body, a grim reminder that nature's hierarchy doesn't recognize human management structures or corporate titles. September 7, 2017, brought perfect dawn conditions to Año Nuevo State Park, California. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, its surface painted in shades of gold and crimson as the sun crested the coastal mountains in a spectacular display of natural beauty. Light offshore winds created glassy conditions with minimal waves, and the water temperature was a comfortable 64 degrees, ideal for swimming if one ignored the prominent warning signs posted throughout the area. The morning air was crisp and clean, filled with the salt scent of the ocean and the distant barking of elephant seals. For Jennifer Caldwell, a 41-year-old marketing executive from Los Angeles, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to maintain her fitness routine during her wellness retreat. She had no idea she was about to enter a hunting ground where she would become the prey in an ancient dance of predator and victim. Jennifer embodied the worst of entitled Los Angeles culture, bringing her demanding personality and superiority complex to every situation she encountered. A successful marketing executive on a wellness retreat that she had already criticized extensively on social media, she complained about everything from the accommodations to the organic food, the meditation sessions to the yoga instructors. She was an aggressive swimmer who ignored all posted warnings and lifeguard instructions, believing her superior swimming skills and decades of pool experience made safety rules irrelevant. To Jennifer, the ocean was just another amenity that should bend to her will, like a hotel pool or private gym, rather than a wild ecosystem filled with apex predators that had ruled these waters for millions of years. Her fellow retreat participants had grown tired of her constant complaints and entitled behavior over the past week. She had demanded special meal accommodations, criticized the retreat leader's qualifications, and posted negative reviews online while still participating in the program. She treated the local staff like servants and dismissed safety briefings as fear-mongering designed to limit her experience. Several participants had requested room changes to avoid her negativity, and the retreat organizers were considering asking her to leave early. At 7:30 a.m., despite multiple posted warnings about great white sharks and seal activity, Jennifer entered the water at Año Nuevo Beach for her daily constitutional swim. The warnings were particularly urgent during this time of year, as September marked peak seal pupping season when great whites were most active in the area. Local surfers who were checking the conditions immediately warned her about a 14-foot great white spotted just 30 minutes earlier during the early morning seal hunting period. But Jennifer dismissed their concerns with typical arrogance, claiming decades of swimming experience made their warnings irrelevant. She swam directly toward the elephant seal colony, declaring the warnings were probably fabricated to keep tourists away, and that she refused to let local propaganda interfere with her workout routine. The seals, sensing danger, began barking more frantically and moving toward the water, but Jennifer interpreted their behavior as simply being startled by her presence, rather than fleeing from a much more dangerous predator lurking beneath the surface. Great white sharks are apex predators virtually unchanged for 400 million years of evolution, representing the pinnacle of oceanic hunting efficiency. They can detect electrical impulses from a beating heart and sense vibrations in the water from great distances, making them incredibly effective at locating prey even in murky conditions. Their 300 serrated teeth, arranged in multiple rows, continuously regenerate throughout their lifetime, ensuring they always have razor-sharp weapons ready for hunting. When attacking from below, they can launch their 2,000-pound bodies partially out of the water at speeds reaching 25 miles per hour, delivering a bite force of up to 4,000 pounds per square inch. Their torpedo-shaped bodies are perfectly designed for explosive bursts of speed, and their dark upper coloration provides perfect camouflage when viewed from above. The massive great white, a 16-foot female that had been patrolling the seal colony's feeding grounds since before dawn, detected Jennifer's movements from nearly a quarter-mile away. The shark's sophisticated sensory system identified the unusual splashing patterns and electrical signatures that didn't match the seals it typically hunted in these waters. As Jennifer swam closer to the seal colony, completely oblivious to the danger beneath her, the great white began its approach from the depths, rising silently through the dark water with predatory precision, honed by millions of years of evolution. The attack came without warning, as great white attacks always do. The massive shark struck Jennifer from below in a classic predatory attack, its enormous jaws clamping down with devastating force around her torso. The impact alone was enough to cause fatal injuries, but the shark's serrated teeth tore through flesh and bone with surgical precision. Her screams alerted surfers, who immediately called 911, but the shark's initial bite had caused catastrophic blood loss and internal trauma that made survival impossible. Coast Guard helicopters arrived within 30 minutes, their crews scanning the crimson-stained water for any sign of life. But Jennifer had already succumbed to her injuries, her decades of swimming experience useless against millions of years of predatory evolution. The great white, having determined that Jennifer was not its preferred prey, had released her and disappeared back into the depths, leaving behind only the tragic evidence of what happens when human arrogance meets nature's most perfect predator. March 12, 2018, brought mild spring weather to the private primate sanctuary in North Carolina, with temperatures reaching a comfortable 72 degrees and gentle breezes carrying the scent of blooming dogwood trees across the facility's grounds. The sun filtered through the canopy of oak and pine trees that surrounded the sanctuary, creating dappled patterns of light and shadow on the walking paths. Dogwood trees were beginning to bloom, their white petals drifting like snow across the facility's grounds in a peaceful display that masked the tension building within the sanctuary's walls. For Michelle Brennan, a 39-year-old nonprofit administrator from Atlanta, it seemed like the perfect day to create content for her social media followers. She was about to make a decision that would cost her everything and serve as a brutal reminder that some boundaries should never be crossed. Michelle was a controlling nonprofit administrator who volunteered at the primate sanctuary primarily to network and boost her social media presence, rather than out of any genuine concern for animal welfare. She constantly criticized the facility's operations and treated the experienced staff like incompetent subordinates, despite having zero animal experience herself and only volunteering for 3 months. To Michelle, the sanctuary was just another photo opportunity, and the dangerous primates were props for her Instagram feed rather than powerful wild animals deserving respect and caution. She had already posted dozens of photos and videos from the sanctuary, always positioning herself as the expert, despite her complete lack of qualifications. Her behavior had become increasingly problematic over the weeks leading up to the incident. She questioned safety protocols, criticized feeding schedules, and constantly suggested improvements that demonstrated her fundamental misunderstanding of primate behavior and sanctuary operations. Staff members had complained to management about her entitled attitude and disregard for safety rules, but she was a significant donor to the organization, which complicated efforts to address her behavior. She had been caught multiple times in restricted areas, always claiming she was just trying to help or getting better photos for fundraising. At 11:40 a.m., while staff conducted a mandatory safety meeting about new protocols for handling aggressive primates, Michelle used her volunteer key card to enter the restricted area housing Bruno, a 180-pound rescued male chimpanzee with a history of aggressive behavior toward humans. She had been complaining about boring volunteer duties like cleaning enclosures and preparing food, wanting instead to create exciting content that would generate more likes and followers on her social media accounts. Bruno had been rescued from an illegal breeding operation and had never properly socialized with humans, making him particularly dangerous and unpredictable. When she entered Bruno's enclosure with her phone held high, filming herself for what she planned to be a dramatic video about connecting with their primate cousins, the territorial male chimp initially displayed warning behaviors that any trained staff member would have immediately recognized as signs of extreme agitation. Bruno screamed, bared his teeth, and charged the fence, all clear indicators that he felt threatened and was preparing to defend his territory. Michelle, filming herself with her back to the agitated animal, dismissed his behavior as attention-seeking while she approached closer, attempting to take a selfie with the increasingly agitated primate. Chimpanzees possess nearly twice the muscle strength of humans, with muscle fibers that contract with explosive power developed through millions of years of evolution in the African forests. Their canine teeth grow up to 1.3 inches long, designed for tearing flesh and establishing dominance within their social groups, while their hands can grip with tremendous force, and tear apart objects that would require tools for humans to damage. When threatened in their territory, male chimps become incredibly aggressive, using their superior strength and agility to neutralize perceived threats with brutal efficiency. Unlike humans, they fight without restraint or mercy, using their teeth and powerful hands as weapons in a display of primal violence that can be shocking in its intensity and speed. Bruno, feeling threatened in his territory by Michelle's aggressive approach and loud vocalizations, launched himself at the enclosure barrier with the explosive power that made chimpanzees so dangerous in captivity. His 180-pound frame, packed with muscle and driven by territorial rage, struck the barrier with enough force to rattle the entire structure. Michelle, finally realizing the danger she had placed herself in, tried to back away, but she had already triggered the chimp's attack response, and there was no retreat from the consequences of her reckless behavior. The powerful chimp, using his incredible upper body strength, managed to grab Michelle through the barrier, his long arms reaching farther than she had anticipated. His grip was like a steel vise, and once he had hold of her, there was no escape from his crushing strength. Michelle's screams alerted staff who initiated emergency protocols, but the powerful chimp had already begun inflicting severe injuries with his teeth and hands, his primal instincts taking over completely. Her phone clattered to the ground, still recording as Bruno demonstrated why these animals require maximum security enclosures and why safety protocols exist. Staff managed to tranquilize Bruno within minutes of hearing Michelle's screams, but the brief encounter had been devastatingly effective. Michelle had sustained fatal injuries from the brief but violent encounter, her quest for social media fame ending in a tragedy that would haunt the sanctuary forever and serve as a stark reminder of the thin line between human civilization and the raw power of our evolutionary cousins. The incident led to a complete overhaul of volunteer access protocols and mandatory animal behavior training for all sanctuary workers, ensuring that Michelle's death would serve as a final lesson about respecting the wild nature that can never truly be tamed, no matter how long it has been in captivity. As the sun set over the sanctuary grounds, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Michelle's story joined the grim collection of encounters that remind us that nature's power remains unchanged by human arrogance, and that some lessons are written in blood by teachers who show no mercy to those who refuse to learn. These 5 women, each convinced of their own superiority over the natural world, discovered too late that apex predators don't recognize human hierarchies, social media followers, or credit card receipts. They only understand the ancient language of survival, where entitlement means nothing, and respect for nature's power is the only currency that matters. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.